speakers for you today, and I'm going to introduce the first speaker, and then another board member is going to introduce our second speaker for you. So our first speaker is David Cravit. Did I say that right, David? Did I say your last name right, Cravit? He is a Canadian author, he's a public speaker, and he's vice president of Zoomer Magazine, or ZoomerMedia. He has written the book, The New Old, How Boomers Are Changing Everything Again. He's a frequent speaker and at corporate and industry events, so we've got a top-notch speaker here today. Prior to joining Zoomer Magazine, he was partner in Saffer Cravit Freedman Advertising, which he helped take from a startup company to a company that made over $150 million. So the agency had offices in Toronto, Chicago, and was recognized as a leading retail specialist agency in North America. Cravit has been recognized as a leading expert in his field and has participated in at most senior levels in creation and placement of over $50 billion worth of media advertising. So he's a native of Toronto, and he was educated at the University of Toronto, and he received his Bachelor of Arts degree there in political science. So I invite you to come speak to us.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here, and especially to see such a great turnout. We were a little worried about the weather coming down from Toronto, but I'm really delighted to see such a strong showing. I'm going to try to keep it moving along. I am going to be here afterwards if there's any questions and answers, and I keep it nice and informal. And what I'd like to do is to try to describe the revolution in aging that is going on all around us. You probably saw the latest report from Stats Canada yesterday on how some of the changes in the way people are living, how much longer they're living. And I want to try to relate that to the relevance of CARP, because I think it makes the mission even more exciting than it used to be. Now, by background, I'm a baby boomer. I'm about as old as you can be and still be a baby boomer. So I lived through the whole phenomenon I'm going to describe. And if you think back to my parents' generation, or your parents' or grandparents' generation, aging was pretty simple. You worked till you were 65, you got the gold watch, and you had maybe 7, 8, 10 years to go, hopefully dignified, hopefully in reasonable health, often not, but you were done. You were now a passenger, you were now a witness to society, and to the extent that you needed any advocacy or lobbying for you, it was as a relatively helpless, passive person. I'm speaking as the whole generation, I don't mean every individual. Pretty much dependent on whether society would kick in a little bit of money to ease you, through the final stage of your life. In 1922, when William Lyon Mackenzie King introduced the first old age pensions in Canada, note the name old age pensions in Canada, they were actually means tested. They were for males only, and you had to have a means test to prove that you were pretty much destitute to get something in the neighborhood of $20 a month from the government, and that was considered radical, communistic, oh my God, life will end. Not anymore. Today, in percentage terms in North America, and I'm cheating a bit, I admit, because it's a low base, but in percentage terms, the fastest growing age group are centenarians. There are more people in Canada today over the age of 60 than under the age of 14. Never happened before in our history. The participation rate in the economy, the percentage of people over the age of 55 that are still working, highest it's ever been. So everywhere we look, we see signs of longevity. And that longevity is creating great opportunities for us as well as challenges. And both of those are addressed by CARP. And I think that's what makes it so exciting. Yes, there is a dire need. Yes, there are many, many seniors living in poverty. Yes, the phenomenon of fixed income is a challenge to us all, even if we think we're well off. The number of years you've got to go on that fixed income. If you reach 65 today in Canada, 65, and you have reasonably good health, maybe you've got the aches and pains and the arthritis, but nothing life-death threat. You've got a 50-50 shot at reaching 95. So who's got enough money to live on for 35 years, 30 years, 25 years? So that's the tough part. The good part is, if you think you've got 20 years to go, you're going to start making plans, and you're going to start behaving not as someone who is fading away, but as someone who's just got a lot of stuff left to do, explore, discover. Baby boomers and seniors are going back to university, whether for a degree or just for fun, in record numbers. They are not retiring, they're volunteering, they're engaged. They are the dominant group at the ballot box. 60% of all votes cast are by Zoomers, 45 and up. They control the marketplace. 15 million Canadians are 45 and up. 3 million are 18 to 24. 5 times the size. Our age group controls the marketplace, accounts for about 60% of all consumer spending, about 70% of all wealth. And again, as a group, there are huge exceptions. So we are not acting the way any previous generation acted when it comes to aging. We are throwing away the rule book and behaving younger than any other generation behaved at that same age previously. Now, it looks kind of surprising and shocking, and every time you pick up the paper you read about some new trend where baby boomers are, you know, the cliche of the grandmother skydiving out of the airplane, and cougars, and I mean all this kind of stuff that's going on out there. And it looks kind of shocking because it's never happened before. But what's really happening is we are pioneering. We are the advanced guard, going out ahead and pioneering what aging is going to be. So as we are here today, in the 2 hours we are here, a baby will be born, I'm sure, law of averages, somewhere in the local hospital here in Chatham-Kent. There'll be a baby being born, assuming that baby is in reasonable health. That baby's looking at a lifespan of about 120. Now, when that baby grows up, every single aspect of society relating to aging will be different. She won't be looking at a 65-year-old saying, oh, look at that active, engaged person. She's 65, she's acting like she's 40. That'll be what 65 is. It's inevitable. As people live longer and longer, the behaviors at each age will change. We are the first group going out ahead with a machete, if you will, carving that trail to what the future society will look like, because there'll be very different attitudes toward work, toward retirement, toward education, toward housing, toward your identity as a male or female, physically, sexually, socially, emotionally. All those conventional definitions are being wiped out and reshaped now by this group in this room today. And so the mandate for an organization like CARP is not simply to lobby for more benefits or pensions or higher pensions, things that seniors need, although that is clearly a very important part of the mission. It's also to stimulate the members by giving them opportunities, by giving them information to stay engaged, to stay active, to stay involved, subject to good health and so on, and to enable them and empower them to take charge of their own lives for longer and longer and longer. Yesterday, Stats Canada released its report on families, and the media talked about how more seniors are living together as couples. And they attributed part of that to simply longevity. In the past, one or the other, the husband or the wife, most often the husband, would have passed on earlier. So the chances are that when you looked at the, quote, elderly, one or the other had passed away. And today, because they're living longer, then more of them are still alive as a couple. But there's another reason. And the other reason is that the attitude of this generation, again, I'm generalizing, I'm not trying to say every single person in the room. The attitude is, I'm going into a nursing home. Never. They want to stay independent. We want to stay in our homes independent as long as possible. With the housing crisis in the United States and the preponderance of adult children still living at home, 45% of kids 20 to 29 in Canada, still living with their parents. We are now, as a generation, starting to look at that and saying, you know, maybe that's not an aberration. Maybe that's not this kind of, when will this kid get out of the basement and finally get a job? Maybe that's the way it's going to be, and maybe we can start to make intelligent choices around that. There's a niche emerging, and it's a very small niche, but it's identifiable, of multi-generational housing that is deliberate and not accidental. So instead of retrofitting the granny flat, oh, when mom's coming to live with us, better renovate that bedroom upstairs, it now becomes a conscious decision to buy a house configured so as to contain multiple generations. Very embryonic little trend, but you're seeing more of that. You're going to see more pressure on governments to give tax credits and grants to enable retrofitting houses for multi-generational use. You're going to see co-op housing, where more seniors getting together to buy their own home and install maybe a caregiver for all of them. So we are reshaping all of these institutions. Some of it is a false trail. Some of it is a trend that will peter out. Some of it is lasting. And as we do this, what you're beginning to also see, which is the second book I wrote, and I brought some copies down in case anybody would like to purchase one, but if not, I'll donate them to the chapter and you can liquidate them out over time. You're beginning to see a lot in the newspapers about the so-called war of the generations. Those greedy boomers that won't finally retire and get off the stage and make room for somebody else. Can't pick up the paper nowadays without reading about the millennials, who are, let's say, the college-age recent graduate, can't get a job, can't get started in their career, can't afford anything, still living at home, and those greedy boomers still hanging on to their jobs, still fighting for their pensions, starving the education budget in order for them to keep their entitlements. So that's starting to happen, and I've written about that, but what's also happening, the truth is that the baby boomers, the older generations, are quietly taking care of that too. Namely by writing the checks for the millennials. And I can't tell you, as I've gone around talking about my book, how many people have come up to me and said, thank goodness somebody's finally sticking up for the boomers and the seniors. I'm so tired of being blamed. The truth of the matter is that in Canada today, and way more in the United States, the average baby boomer, 46 to 66 approximately, is ridiculously underfunded in terms of being able to retire. We have not put away enough money to sustain the longevity. So the good news is you're going to live longer. The bad news is you're going to live longer. We don't have enough money. Okay? Now, I exempt myself from that. I was lucky. I had Freedom 55, so I'm all set. Right? In my case, it means I have to keep on working till my kids turn 55. Or as we like to call it at CARP, Freedom 95. The truth is we have to keep working longer because we're underfunded, but also attitudinally we want to keep working longer, full-time, part-time, hobby, whatever, because that's how we stay in the game. We see ourselves as players. All our lives we were capable, we were competent. If we are baby boomers, we're the largest generation ever. So all through our life, we grew up as the most important generation. When we were kids, it was Saturday morning cartoons. When we were teenagers, it was rock and roll. When we went to university, it was hippies and the war in Vietnam and Woodstock. 10 years after that, without batting an eye, we turned into yuppies and went to work on Bay Street and bought Beamers and Sony Trinitron TVs. At every stage of our life, who we were and what we were was the dominant influence in the society. So now that we hit what was the traditional age of retirement, does anybody think we're willingly going to revert to our grandparents? Just going to get off the stage quietly and start acting like an old person? It's not happening. It's not going to happen, and it's not happening. We are trying to stay in the game longer, health permitting, and even in healthcare. We are working harder and harder to take more control of our own health. We're looking for information that will enable us to sustain good health for longer. In my grandpa's era, and I have a grandfather who lived to 97, the last 30 years of his life, he was an old age pensioner. He didn't budge from that identity. In that era, You went to the doctor only when you got sick. The doctor treated you. You went home, and you didn't go to the doctor again till the next time you got sick. You were the patient. The doctor was God. Today, more and more people, while still respecting the doctor, are morphing, and we're leading the way, from patient to consumer. We're looking for alternative information. We're going online. We're seeking second, third, fourth opinions. The doctor, particularly the family doctor, has morphed as well, from God to supplier. A respected supplier, a trusted supplier, but no longer God. If you want to know how true this is, just for fun, go home tonight and Google, go online and Google discount heart surgery. You will be stunned at how many hits you get. Now, you could say, well, wait a minute, we're ignorant, but we're not qualified to look at that medical information and know what to do with it. Nevertheless, we're seeking it out. That's all I'm saying. We're looking at different options. And the good news for people as we age today is that the number of options is much wider. I don't care if it's education, the job market, healthcare. We are seeking more options, and more options are available to us to almost customize our own aging process to our needs. Does this require money? Absolutely. Is it vital, life, death vital, to have a strong organization advocating for our well-being on the financial front, whether it's pension reform, whether it's pharmacare, whether it's retirement benefits? Do we need that advocacy? Absolutely. But even with all that advocacy, we're still looking to do other stuff for ourselves because we want to stay active and we want to stay in the game. So the good news that what's happening in aging today is longevity, diversity, more opportunity than ever before. This so-called war of the generations, we're quietly fixing it, but there's another aspect to the war I want to talk about that's kind of interesting. In the book, and you could do this yourself, I go back to ancient Greece and find quotes from elders complaining about the youth. Socrates has a famous quote that Greece is doomed because the youth of today have no respect for their elders, they talk too loud, they're rude, they're gluttons at the table. I forget the exact word. Oh my God, the sky is falling. You can go into Bible times, ancient Egypt, 1st century, 5th century, 10th century, you can find these quotes all the time. The phenomenon of the old curmudgeon wagging the scolding finger at the young whippersnapper is as old as recorded history. The difference now is, in the past, that old curmudgeon who was rolling his eyes, and your grandparents probably did it with the music you listened to as kids, that person, that older person, and this is a serious point, that older person rolling his eyes at the wayward youth was almost deceased. They were done. They weren't a player anymore. They didn't have any power anymore. They were heading for the grave pretty soon. So that was the kind of irrelevant old codger in the corner of the room mumbling to himself or herself about how bad the kids were today. They were easy to ignore because their day had come and gone. Today, the person looking at the youth and wondering is someone who's got possibly decades of productive, active, involved life ahead of them. So it matters if we think that the next generation isn't as capable as we were, and in some areas they are not. It matters because we still have the numbers and we still have the clout at the ballot box to have a very serious impact on what happens to the rest of the society. We're still very much engaged. We're not off the stage hoping that the audience has a few rounds of applause left for us as we shuffle out of the spotlight. We're still in the spotlight. So if you're here, and if you want to be part of this, and if you're engaged in this, the challenge is not just the advocacy piece, as vital as that is. The challenge is to open up your itself to all the different possibilities and to tap into the information, the venues, the platforms, the events, information from CARP itself as well as from ZoomerMedia on what's out there and what's possible and where it can go from here. 2 years ago, Ross and I met with Athabasca University in Edmonton, which is an online university. And they were talking about online learning and the ability of everybody to go back online and get a degree. And it was a very established, is a very established university. But there was still a little bit of a, is it a real university? You're taking courses online. It's interesting, but is it really, does a degree from Athabasca, is it worth what a degree from U of T is? That was 2 years ago. This past year, the University of Toronto joined a consortium offering online courses. And the consortium was the University of Toronto, Stanford, MIT, and Harvard, all embracing online learning, whether for a degree or not. Courses that are being offered online. MIT offered its first course for credit. You could, write the exam and get a credit. I don't remember if it was Engineering 101 or one of their courses. They had 120,000 enrollees from around the world. The university community is embracing online learning. And the reason I mention it is that part of what we also talked about with Athabasca, and I don't think it happened then, but it's still sort of in the air, is the idea of using baby boomers and seniors not only as students, but as teaching assistants, as advisors to the courses. Imagine being able to go online and engaging with young people who are studying in a particular course or discipline that mirrors what you did in your career. Companies are beginning to recognize that when people retire, all kinds of intellectual property, all kinds of vital information is leaving the building with those people. And they're calling them back in to give them, at minimum, a brain dump. I want to know everything you know before you leave, because you've been at this for 40 years. Do you know that there are underground missiles in the United States today, nuclear tipped, this is kind of scary, not all of them, but about a quarter of their underground missiles date back to the 1970s, and nobody knows how to maintain them. They've all retired. And there's all new generation of missiles that's come in, but the oldest missile still in the ground with nuclear warheads, nobody knows how to fix it. So there's this whole recognition that your knowledge, I'm looking at everybody in this room, whether you worked in a profession, whether you didn't work, whether you stayed at home, your knowledge and your experience is vitally important to the next generation coming in behind. And the legacy that we can all leave, not just in terms of our estate and our money, because there's going to be wealthy people in this room and less wealthy people in this room, people who have money to give away or leave in a will, people who need every penny. I'm not getting into individual differences. But the whole notion of the value of our knowledge and the mechanism to transfer that, there's never been a mechanism to transfer that knowledge before. That's another advantage we all have. There's now going to be platforms, formats, venues, some of them that CARP is trying to organize, for you to be able to make an important contribution on and on and on. So my word today, sort of wrapping up with all the different things I've been writing about, is the common denominator that unites us all. And I know there are individual exceptions, that people who are very ill, I'm not trying to be glib about it. But the common denominator that unites virtually all of us, regardless of our income, regardless of our age, regardless of our needs, is that we have an unprecedented opportunity for engagement, for active living, for being engaged in the society, for influencing the lives around us and our own life. That's never been true of, quote, old people before. It's never been true before. Because we have such a long runway, And the society is now recognizing the value of that, and we ourselves are now seizing that limelight, if you will, saying, I'm not getting off. I've got stuff to do. I've got stuff to do. A couple of years ago, we had a meeting with the Ontario Ministry of Tourism. And they were worried because seniors didn't seem to want to go anymore in the same numbers as they used to. Didn't seem to want to go up to Georgian Bay and in the summer and sit in an Adirondack chair and stare at the waves and then get the early bird buffet at 4:30. They wanted to go to Machu Picchu. And when they went to Machu Picchu, there were 7 buses ahead of them, filled with seniors, waiting to see. They didn't want to go in a passive vacation. Why do I want to do that? I gave a talk in Calgary to an organization of all the volunteer organizations in Calgary on engaging us as volunteers. And the research was clear. I don't want to go into your hospital and sit in the gift shop all day long and sell magazines. I want to go to Costa Rica and teach English in the school in the jungle. And I can go online and find brokers who will give me 200 of those gigs that I can pick from. I want to do something different. I want to learn, I want to develop, I want to explore, I want to engage within my means. I'm going to close with one anecdote about a CARP member who I think embodies the whole thing that's going on with aging, which I'm always watching like a hawk. This is a member from Calgary, 82-year-old widower, and he lives in a bungalow, didn't have a mortgage, had a very tiny pension from his company and Canada Pension, and he was doing okay. Okay, I don't want to break out that he wasn't rich, he wasn't poor, he had to count his pennies, he had to be careful, but he was okay. Except for one thing. There's one thing he wanted that he couldn't afford. He wanted to be able to spend 8 weeks a year, 2 months in the middle of the winter, down in Mexico. He'd been there once, he found a place, he liked it, and it cost X thousand dollars. He didn't have it. Didn't have it. He was okay otherwise, you know, careful, but okay. Didn't have the money. So he got a job at Tim Hortons. So he goes into Tim Hortons, and of course he's 82. They're not going to keep him on his feet all day long, so he's got, you know, 3-4 hour, whatever it is, couple days a week, whatever it was, part-time. So look at what happens. So first of all, he's getting out of the house, which was good for him. Second of all, he gradually builds up a little clientele of regulars. Gets himself a little mafia who knows that Charlie's at the Timmy's every Tuesday and Thursday. So he builds up a little bit of a following. They start going there to talk to him. There's a little bit of continuity from week to week. There was a hockey game last week, and you said they were going to lose, but they didn't. He's building up, so he's interacting. He's getting out of the house. He's socializing. And in 10 months of working part-time, he puts away enough thousands of dollars to be able to go off to Mexico in the, you know, the heart of the Alberta winter. So my question is he retired? Yes, but in a way, no. He's still engaged. He's still active. He's a player. He's making decisions for himself. This is not a wealthy guy. You can't look at him and say, well, it's easy for him. If I had all those millions of dollars, I could be hot stuff too. No, this guy was break even at best. Luckily, he had good health, and there's many in this age group that aren't blessed that way, but okay. But he was doing stuff. So I think what CARP itself has morphed, well, remember, CARP is 25 years old, to advance with the times from an organization that was purely or almost largely about money. In other words, benefits, discounts, pensions, fight for the economic well-being of our members. Still vital. Don't let me be glib and poo-poo. Vital. But CARP has diversified now to say, wait a minute, it matters that we give our members information on how to live better. What are the resources? We've just introduced a health wizard, which you'll find all about in the magazine and online, that allows you to manage and navigate the health system way better than ever before with one stop, one click of the mouse. So we're looking at ways of helping the members with services and information to make them, you know, live a better life. And then finally, through chapters such as this, events at the local level and some at the national level, to give you a platform. And Ross Mayotte, my colleague and good friend, will talk about this at great length. I don't want to go on and on. So my theme is, we're lucky. There's never been a better time to be this age. We're